Last week, D.C. Attorney General Karl Racine filed an antitrust suit against Amazon, claiming the company manipulates online retail prices by not just crushing competitors, but, quote, raising consumer prices in the process.
We're back with Roger Fisk, Democratic strategist, and Philip Wegman, White House reporter for Real Clear Politics. Welcome back, gentlemen. Let's start with you, Roger. How strong do you think the case that Attorney General Racine made in that suit is? Do you think this is something that's really going to change the game as far as the antitrust argument against Amazon goes, or do you think this is sort of more symbolic?
Sure, it's going to be fascinating to watch. I think, in the modern context, the parallel that we have is probably the Microsoft antitrust suit, and that has to take some kind of baby steps. It's incremental, right? No one just kind of filed a suit and won that straight off the bat. I think you're going to see a pattern of these things starting to happen. And then that will culminate to maybe when 6 or 8 states join the Attorney General from D.C. or any number of other things, so almost in a way similar to the tobacco kind of lawsuits and things like that. But there always has to be a first step, and I think we're seeing it now. It does lead to a couple interesting broader questions, and one of them is this, and I never hear anyone talk about this really. I've worked 30 states across these presidential campaigns, and for all the talk about getting tough on China and what our trade relationship means and all that other stuff, I have yet to see a barren parking lot of a box store. And there's a component about this, about how the American consumer spends their dollar, that I think needs to be part of this conversation, because if people can take a moment and think about where that dollar is going, and maybe take even just a couple of those dollars and curb it towards locally sourced products from their grocery list on through any number of other things, that could have a titanic impact on the ongoing decay of Main Street and communities across this country, obviously the economic impact and any number of other things. I hope as this starts to play out that localization of some of our spending is part of the conversation.
And Philip, what's unusual about this suit is its focus on prices, because for decades, Amazon has said, look, you might think that we're a monopoly, you might think we're monopolizing e-commerce, but actually, if the test is prices, our prices are the lowest. And so just go away and enjoy the cheap products that we're selling here. What do you make of this effort to actually link them to higher prices? And do you think people are feeling that and are ready to believe that kind of on a base political level?
Well, the argument is eroded when you have Amazon Marketplace and Prime and all of these different entities working together. I think that when we're talking about this in terms of a political issue, Donald Trump wasn't speaking about this in particular, but he did go to war over Amazon somehow making the Postal Service insolvent. I don't think there was a lot of merit to that question in particular, but it shows that this is a bipartisan frustration. You have people on the right and the left who are upset about Amazon. I don't think that there are going to be a lot of Republicans suddenly out there saying, don't bully businesses, leave this corporation alone. No, Amazon is firmly in the villain category here. And as more of these lawsuits continue, I think it's going to be harder for them to make this argument where they just look around and say, hey, we gave you cheaper stuff. Love us for that.
So, Roger, you made a really interesting point about consumer choice, and there's new legislation that would force people who are doing manufacturing and selling Chinese products to say that and to use bigger labels or more clearer, more obvious labeling on those things. I wonder what you think about Democrats adopting legislation like that. I mean, I think there would be, in the Republican Party, the schism exists. You'd have some centrist Republicans who wouldn't like it. You'd have some populist Republicans who would love it. How would you see that dynamic playing out on a bill like that on the left? Are there going to be a lot of Democrats that sort of are friendly to that because the momentum against Amazon does seem to be building by the day? Or are there going to be people who are more receptive to those lobbyists who don't want to hear or who don't want to support legislation in that vein?
That's the key word, right? Like lobbyists. I as Senate staff, I never worked on this issue, but I shared an office with a guy who worked on this issue, and you end up learning a lot about this stuff. This, should something like this move forward, you will see dozens, if not hundreds of pages of twisted, tortured, pretzel-shaped language about what made, quote unquote, means. And this is an ongoing battle between the chambers of commerce and any number of other people about, so if the part is made abroad but then it's assembled domestically, is that made in America? Like, it becomes an extremely torturous conversation that has a path into it that is literally miles wide for lobbyists to go in there and do carve outs and use very, should rather than must and will rather than can and any number of other things. That's going to be just a tortured piece of language. And that said, I think the impulse is correct, because that's why we have labels now, right? It's essentially layered onto a lot of our supply chain right now. So the impulse is good, but once it goes through kind of the lobbyist kind of meat grinder, Lord knows what we're going to end up with, because it's going to be 1,200 pages or something.
And Emily, what do you make of the Biden administration's reluctance to, or slow pace in naming the Department of Justice Antitrust Division chief, head of FCC? Like, what's going on here? What are they waiting for?
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious about that too. It's almost like they're trying to take the temperature of the first few months of the administration. I mean, Philip, you cover the White House. What's your read on that situation?
Well, this administration likes to talk about urgency. It's their byword for everything when it comes to legislation. They're always talking about moving as quickly as possible. I've actually asked Jen Psaki this question more than once when it comes to some of the different administration heads for DHS, for ICE, for some of those entities that are involved in the border crisis. Their answer was, at the time back in March and April, when those nominations had not been made, that they were just looking around for the right people. Those positions have since been filled, but it does beg the question. You had Joe Biden, who said that he was ready to roll on day one, and you're still waiting around to make some of these nominations. Look, there's nothing stopping the president from naming who his man is going to be, and then letting the Senate do it as its advise and consent process. I think that this is the less of the administration, losing resumes and CVs, and instead the administration taking the temperature of Washington.
All right, Roger and Philip, thank you so much for your time. Next on Rising, friend of the show, Zed Jelani is here. He weighs in on Paul Ryan's culture war comments. Very excited about that. It's coming up next.